Let's start with the obvious. The September LSAT just went from busy to bursting at the seams. Last year, we had 18,811 people registered for the September LSAT. This year, at the time of recording, we have 455. That's nearly 13,000 more people showing up for the same test, competing for the same seats, and fighting for the same scholarships. This is not a small blip in the data. This is the kind of jump that changes the feel of the entire cycle. Imagine you were to walk into a coffee shop that you go to every morning. Usually, there are 10 people ahead of you in line. Today, there are 52. The coffee is the same, but your entire strategy changes. You might order ahead, you might try a different coffee shop, you might even show up an hour earlier. The product didn't change, but the context did. And that's the key. The LSAT is still the LSAT. Law school admissions still runs on the same rules, but the environment you're playing in is more crowded, more competitive, and more compressed in time. That changes how you got to prepare, how you time your application, and how you manage the months after the test. We see this happen in real time with our students. In normal years, you might get away with some rough edges, an application that's slightly late, a personal statement that's just fine, a last-minute study push. But in years like this, those rough edges get magnified. The people you're up against are just as motivated as you are. Many of them have been studying for months, and if you show up without a clear plan, you're hoping to win a sprint against people who've been training for a marathon. The point of this is not to scare you though, it's to make sure you understand what's actually at stake, and how to turn that crowd into an advantage instead of a problem. Because yes, there are ways to use a year like this to help your chances, but you can't pretend it's just business as usual. Now, big numbers like the number of applicants or the number of LSAT takers might sound impressive, but they're abstract until you see what they actually mean in the real world. So let's break down what 31,455 September LSAT registrants actually translates into for your LSAT journey and your law school applications. First, even with the normal no-show rate, thousands more people will actually take the LSAT this year over last year. That means thousands more scored LSAT reports being generated within days of each other. And those scores don't just sit in a drawer collecting dust. They will land on law school admissions desks all at once. Picture a conveyor belt in a factory suddenly doubling its speed. Of course, the admissions officers still have the same number of hours in the day, but now they've got double the number of files to review. And that's going to change the way they sort and prioritize those applications. The second thing to know is that timing matters. September is prime real estate on the admissions calendar. Scores from this test arrive early enough to give applicants the rolling admissions advantage. They're also early enough that you still have retake options in October, November, January, even February, which is still before most schools finish giving out their biggest scholarships. But when tens of thousands of people choose the same test date, that early wave gets bigger. It's not a gentle stream trickling into the admissions pool, it's more of a flood. And this is crucial. The effect compounds when you think about medians. Schools care deeply about protecting their LSAT medians because those numbers affect their rankings, which in turn affect their reputation and their applicant volume in future years. And in a crowded cycle, they've got more applicants to choose from at each score level. That means they can be choosier earlier in the cycle. It also means that if you're just below their median, you're more likely to get pushed to the waitlist while they keep fishing for someone who matches the goal number. And there's also a psychological layer here too. When there are more people in the room, people tend to react to what they think everyone else is doing. So if you're the kind of person who lives on Reddit or law school forums, you're going to see more panic posts, more threads asking, what does all this mean for me? And more score flexing. And that can mess with your head if you don't have a clear plan. The truth is that most of those posts are just noise. And if you don't have your own strategy locked in, it's easy to get pulled into reactive, last-minute changes that hurt you more than the competition ever could. And so one of the first things we do with our students in a cycle like this is build what I call a pressure-proof plan. That means your study arc, your application prep, your retake decision tree, all mapped out before the chaos starts. Because the moment you hit September without that map, the combination of actual competition and perceived competition will push you into decisions you'll regret. So the bottom line is the surge isn't just a headline, it's a chain reaction. More people testing means more scores sent at the same time, which means more applications reviewed in a tighter window, which means more aggressive median protection by admissions. You can, of course, navigate this successfully, but only if you plan for this environment, not the one from last year. Now, to understand why September has become the center of gravity for LSAT takers, you've got to look at the way admissions works in the real world, not the way people imagine it from a distance. Law schools operate on rolling admissions. That means the earlier your file is complete, the earlier it can be read, and the more seats and scholarship dollars are still available when it lands on someone's desk. A September LSAT score gives you a golden window. You can finalize your applications in the early fall, well before the bulk of the competition even starts submitting. But that's just the first piece. The second is scholarships. Schools don't hand out all their merit aid in one day. They allocate it as they build their classes. If you can show up early with a strong LSAT and a well-prepared application, you're negotiating from a place of strength. But if you show up late, you might still get money, but the best offers are already gone and you're competing for whatever's left in the budget. And then there's the retake factor. September sits in the perfect spot on the calendar. If you test in September and your score isn't quite what you want it to be, you've got a clean runway to take in November or worst case January without missing the main scholarship window. That means you can use September as both a high stakes attempt and a diagnostic. If you hit your target, fantastic, you lock in early. But if you fall short, you've got time to regroup and come back stronger before the biggest admissions and aid decisions are made. Now here's why this matters even more in a high volume year. With so many people choosing September, the early wave of applications is going to be bigger than ever. That can feel intimidating, but it's actually an opportunity if you play it right. If your file is polished and your score is competitive, you get to ride that wave into the review pile when schools are still eager to admit you. But if your file is late or your score isn't ready yet, you risk getting caught in the undertow. You're going to be stuck in a long waitlist game while other people are locking in their seats and scholarship money. In a year like this, we position September as a launch pad for our students, not necessarily the finish line. It's the moment you put your best work on the table and set yourself up for a smart second attempt if you need it. That dual role is what makes September so powerful, and why treating it like just another test date is one of the biggest mistakes you can make. Now, if you want to understand that number of 31,455 September LSAT registrants, you can't just stare at it and shrug. You've got to look at what has changed in the lead up to September, because these changes didn't happen by accident. They created a perfect storm that pulled thousands more people into the September LSAT. And the first big driver is obvious. Logic games are gone. They are off the test. For decades, the LSAT had this section full of logic puzzles involving seating arrangements, sequencing, grouping, whatever it was. It scared off a huge chunk of would-be LSAT test takers. It wasn't that these people aren't smart enough, it's that they hated the idea of spending months drawing diagrams for skills they would never use again. And once LSAC announced they were removing logic games, it opened the floodgates. Now we've got on the LSAT 2 scored logical reasoning sections, 1 scored reading comprehension section, and 1 extra unscored section. In other words, all arguments and passages, no logic puzzles. And that change alone was enough to make thousands of non-logic games oriented people finally register for the LSAT. The second driver is money, plain and simple. People have figured out that an LSAT retake isn't just a second try. It's an investment with a massive potential return. Just 2 or 3 points more can be the difference between paying full tuition and getting tens of thousands of dollars in merit scholarship aid. And in some cases, it's the difference between going to your target school and having to settle for a backup. The math is just too obvious to ignore. If you could spend just another month or 2 prepping and walk away with 5 or even 6 figures in scholarship money, why wouldn't you? So this year, more and more people are playing that game consciously. And the third driver in the increased LSAT takes is the bigger economic picture. Whenever the job market feels shaky, grad school applications always go up. People are looking for safer career paths, and law school sits near the top of that list. It has always been seen as a stable professional degree with clear earning potential on the other side. That means even people who were lukewarm about applying before are now getting serious, and many of them are making September their starting line. So if you put all these three factors together, a friendlier format, a clearer ROI, and macroeconomic pressure, you've got your answer. This is not a random fluctuation. It is a structural shift. And in a year like this, ignoring why it happened is a huge mistake. Because if you know the forces driving the surge, you can predict what your competition will look like, and you can plan to stand out in that crowd. And so we don't just tell our students, study harder. We walk them through these dynamics so they understand the game they're actually playing. Because once you see that game for what it is, you stop making rookie mistakes like treating September as a casual warm-up or assuming your competition is unprepared. In a year like this, the people showing up are ready, and you should be too. Now, when you get a surge this big, schools don't just sit back and follow their old playbook. Their entire process tightens up. And if you know how they think, you can see these moves coming. The first thing schools do is they sort earlier. In a normal year, borderline applicants might hang out in a maybe pile for weeks or even months before a decision. But this year, with so many strong applicants in the early wave, that maybe pile shrinks, and the strong, complete files get snapped up quickly. Everybody else risks a waitlist seat until schools see the full applicant pool. So if you're sitting there in late October with an incomplete application because you were waiting for your score, you've missed your shot at that first round of quick admits. Next comes median protection. Schools live and die by their LSAT and GPA medians. They know that those numbers affect rankings, which affect prestige, which affect future applicant pools. And when the volume's high, they can afford to say no to anyone who drags those numbers down, even if the rest of the application is compelling. In practice, that means if you're below a school's median LSAT, you're going to need every other part of your application to be airtight just to stay in the running. Then there's yield protection, and this is one most applicants underestimate. If your stats are well above a school's median, they might worry you're just using them as a backup. And in high volume years, they can afford to hedge their bets and waitlist you unless you prove that you're serious. That's where a crisp, specific why our school essay becomes more than optional. It is an insurance policy against being quietly sidelined. And finally, there's scholarships. This is how schools stretch their budgets. The strongest early admits often get the largest merit packages, and the rest of the money gets held back for later to balance the class by geography, major, career interests, and diversity factors. If you come in late, you might still get an offer, but the numbers will almost certainly be smaller. And so for our students, we're always balancing two priorities in a year like this. First, locking in a competitive score and hitting the front of the admissions line while the resources are still there. The people who can thread that needle, the ones who are both academically ready and strategically early, are the ones who can make this surge work for them instead of against them. Now, let's be blunt. If you're still studying logic games, you're training for a sport that no longer exists. The LSAT you're going to face in September is built on a different center of gravity. And if you want to score at the top of your range, you've got to actually play the game you'll be tested on, not the one people took a year or two ago. The LSAT has 2 scored logical reasoning sections, 1 scored reading comp section, and 1 unscored extra section of either logical reasoning or reading comp. That means 2/3 of your official score is now logical reasoning. And the most important skill in logical reasoning is to identify the argument's core, the conclusion, the support, and the gap between them before you even touch the answer choices. If you can't label those 3 parts, you're guessing. Now, once you've got the core, think in terms of question families rather than memorizing a laundry list of types. Strengthen, weaken, assumption, parallel. Each family demands a specific move, and you want to drill those moves until they're automatic. You also want to keep your pre-phrasing simple. You don't have to write out a whole sentence. You just need a mental note like close the causal gap or make the assumption true. This alone will wipe out 2 or 3 wrong answers before you even start reading. And that is a huge time saver when you've got 25 or 26 questions per section. Now, reading comp is a different animal altogether. This is not about memorizing every single detail. It's about mapping the passage so you can find details fast. That means assigning a role to each paragraph, where the author defines the problem, where they give evidence, where they critique the old model, and where they propose the new one. If you don't have that map, you're going to waste time hunting for a single sentence in a wall of text. And you also can't get lazy with evidence. If you can't put your finger on the exact line that supports your answer, it's not evidence, it's just a guess. And in a crowded field, that discipline is what separates those who walk out smiling from those who walk out muttering about bad luck on the test. Now, comparative passages need their own approach. You map passage A, map passage B, and then compare the purposes, methods, tone, and the limits of each. Don't read both twice, that is a time sink. You're looking here for the functional differences that most questions will hinge on. And so for our students, we hammer home that this is not about studying harder. It's about studying the right things in the right way for the test you'll actually take. That's how you stop wasting hours on old logic games and start pouring your effort into the sections that now matter most. Now here's the truth most people don't want to hear. If you miss your target score in September, that doesn't mean you're done with the LSAT. You are not branded for life with that number. You've still got room to improve, but only if you treat the time between September and your next LSAT like a deliberate surgical campaign. The first 48 to 72 hours after test day are your autopsy window. This is when the details are still fresh in your mind and before your memory starts smoothing over the rough edges. You want to sit down and rebuild test day from start to finish. Where did you lose time? Which logical reasoning questions broke down? Which reading comp passages drained your time and mental energy? Did nerves get you in the first 5 questions, or did you lose focus in the back half? This is not about beating yourself up. It's about creating an exact map of what went wrong so you know what to fix for your retake. And once you've done that autopsy, you make a decision using a simple rule. If you're within 1 or 2 points of a scholarship threshold or your target school's median, retake. If you're way off, figure out why before you even think about signing up for a retake. Was it a content knowledge gap, a timing problem, endurance, nerves? You want to get down to the root cause so you can avoid making that mistake the next time around. And the good news is that when you're retaking, you don't need to start from zero. You are already in shape. What you need is a plan. That means at least 1 full practice test a week to maintain endurance, plus targeted drilling on your top 2 weakest areas. And you want to track behaviors and your process, not just your score. Did you pre-phrase before looking at answer choices? Did you anchor every answer in reading comp to a specific line in the passage? Your score is a lagging indicator and your habits are leading indicators. And this is where mindset matters. 1 bad test does not mean you are bad at logical reasoning or hopeless in reading comp. It means you had specific process gaps under time pressure on that day. And those gaps are fixable. And so when students reach out to us looking for help with their LSAT retake, we build their study plan so that every practice set, every practice test, and every review session is directly tied to closing those exact gaps. No fluff, no random drilling, no let's just hope for the best next time. If you use September as both a high-stakes attempt and a reconnaissance mission, your second shot isn't starting from behind, it's a targeted strike with all the terrain mapped out in advance. That's how you turn a miss into a scholarship-winning score. Now, most applicants make the same mistake in a year like this. They'll wait for their score before they start their applications. On paper, sounds reasonable, but in reality, it's a massive disadvantage, especially in a cycle where the early wave is bigger and stronger than usual. Thing is, schools operate on rolling admissions. They don't wait for all applications to come in before they start signing. They read and admit as they go. So if your application's complete, while seats and scholarship dollars are still abundant, you're playing on easy mode compared to someone who submits months later. If you wait until after your score posts to start writing your essays, you've already burned weeks that could have put your file in that first, most generous review window. The smart play is to front load everything that doesn't depend on your score. Draft your personal statement now, and I don't just mean sketch out some ideas. I mean write it, workshop it, and refine it until it's sharp enough to send. Do the same with your optional essays and your resume. Have your recommenders all lined up and ready to submit letters the moment you give them the green light. And don't make your recommenders guess what to say. Give them bullet points, the classes you took with them, the projects you worked on, the strengths you want them to highlight. Make it easy for them to write something both specific and flattering. The easier you make their job, the faster they're going to deliver and the better the letter will be. And when your September score finally comes back, the goal is to be able to hit submit that day, not after several weeks. That way, you're riding the front of the wave instead of getting dragged along in its wake. And if you're applying to a mix of schools, consider the sequence also. Some are going to be reaches, some are targets, some are safeties. If you're comfortably above the median at a safety, you can hold that file for a scholarship negotiation later. But if you're at or just below median for a reach, submit early to get in the first read cycle. And when we work with students during this part of the cycle, we treat applications like a second job. The LSAT might be your focus, as it should be, but your applications are the other half of the equation. The people who treat them as something they'll get to later often find themselves sending them in after the majority of seats and the big scholarship money is gone. But the ones who prepare now walk into score release week knowing they're about to be at the top of the stack, and that's exactly where you want to be. Now, when the test is this crowded, every single point matters. And in a high volume administration like September, those points don't necessarily come from giant magic breakthroughs. They come from shaving seconds here, avoiding a trap there, and making sure your execution stays clean even when the clock feels like it's screaming at you. Now, one of the most effective approaches in logical reasoning is what I call the two-pass triage. On your first pass, you knock out everything easy and medium. If a question gets kind of sticky after 75 seconds, you skip it with no shame. You're not abandoning it, you're parking it. Then, once you've collected all the easy points, you come back for those stubborn ones with whatever time you've banked. This does two things. It maximizes your score floor, and it keeps you from bleeding time on a single question that's worth the same as all the others. Another high return habit is what I call the assumption blank. Anytime you hit an argument question, strengthen, weaken, necessary, sufficient, you pause and fill in the blank. This argument assumes blank. If you can state that assumption in plain English, you've just built a compass for navigating the answer choices, and anything that doesn't touch your assumption is out. For parallel questions, I want you to resist the urge to diagram immediately unless you absolutely need to. I want you to instead abstract the skeleton of the argument. Maybe it's from all to most, or cause to effect, or an exclusive or. Whatever it is, once you have that skeleton, you can scan the choices for the same bones instead of getting lost in the content. Now, in reading comprehension, you've got to tag the function of each paragraph. That is a non-negotiable. At the end of each paragraph, force yourself to jot down a quick 5-word summary of what that paragraph does, not just what it says. Maybe it's defining a problem and citing a study which tells you a lot more than it was about a study on birds, because it gives you the paragraph's job in the argument. This keeps your map functional and quick to navigate under time pressure. For comparative passages, I want you to find the thesis sentence in each one, the line that, if you removed it, would make the entire passage collapse. Those two sentences are the anchors for most of your comparison questions. Instead of juggling two full passages in your head, you're comparing the most important sentences in each. Now, when we work with students headed into a cycle like this one, we emphasize that these are not flashy tricks. They are boring, repeatable systems. But when the margin between getting in and waitlisted is just 1 or 2 questions, boring and repeatable is what wins. Now, most people hear logistics and immediately tune out. They think it's the boring part. But in a year like this, boring wins. Because the people who get the boring stuff right walk into test day with fewer distractions, fewer surprises, and more brain power available for the actual questions. Start with rehearsing the environment. At least twice before test day, you should take a full practice test in a setting that matches your real test environment as closely as possible. Same chair height, same desk space, same lighting, same background noise, and if you're testing at home, make sure your desk is clear and your internet connection is stable. If you're testing at a Prometric testing center, you want to simulate that public space kind of feeling. No music, with other people around, and no control over every little sound. The goal is for test day to feel boringly familiar, not full of new sensory inputs that might overwhelm you. Next, you want to standardize your tools. If you're using a particular type of scratch paper, pen or pencil, you also want to use it for every single practice test. If you've got a timing routine using the official timer in LawHub, lock that in now. The last thing you want to be doing is adjusting to new materials or a new timer flow on the day that counts. Then you also want to shift your sleep schedule. If you're taking the test in the morning, you need to be fully alert at that time, not only halfway through your first coffee. That means moving your wake up and bedtime to match test day at least a week in advance, weekends included. No variation. Your brain's performance is tied to your circadian rhythm, and you can't cram a sleep shift the night before. Also, food matters. Eat the same breakfast during practice tests that you'll eat on the real thing. That way, your body is used to digesting it under test conditions. This is not the day to try something new because you read on some forum that blueberries boost brain power. If you've been eating oatmeal and eggs for every practice test, eat oatmeal and eggs on test day. Again, boring, simple, straightforward, it works. You also want to have a stress protocol and a contingency plan. A stress protocol means a short, repeatable routine to bring your nervous system down. Something like inhale for 4 seconds, hold for 4, exhale for 6, hold for 2, and repeat. And a contingency plan means knowing exactly what you'll do if something goes wrong. If your proctor's late, if the internet drops out, or your neighbor starts mowing the lawn. Write it down, write down your plan. Practice saying it in your head. That way, if the unexpected happens, you're not improvising in panic mode. And when we work with students, we build these logistics into their plan from day one, because in a crowded, high-pressure year, it's often not the hardest questions that trip you up, it's the small, avoidable distraction that steals your focus for 3 minutes and costs you 2 easy points. Now, when your score arrives, most people do one of 2 things. They either high-five themselves or they spiral into panic. Both reactions miss the real opportunity here. Now, in a year like this, mindset is not just a nice to have, it is a competitive advantage. You could have flawless strategies on paper, but if your brain melts down in the middle of the test, those strategies are not going to save you. Calm means you expect difficulty. You will see hard questions, and everybody will. That's not a sign that something is wrong. That's the LSAT doing exactly what it's designed to do. The people who keep their pacing and their process steady, even when they hit a wall, are the ones who walk out with scores they've been earning in practice. So calm isn't pretending that you're not nervous, it's having practiced your way through those nerves so you know they won't knock you off course. Aggressive means you harvest points wherever they are. It's skipping a 5-minute monster question and moving on to 3 30-second freebies. It's recognizing when you're sunk costing yourself into a single question while the easier points sit untouched. Aggressive doesn't mean reckless, it's just knowing your priority is to collect the maximum number of correct answers in 35 minutes, not to prove that you can beat every hard question in order. And flexible means adapting on the fly. If reading comp passage number 2 is eating up the clock, bail on it and come back. If logical reasoning question 9 looks like it's written in ancient Greek, tag it and move on. This is where your practice should mirror your test day conditions, so you've already rehearsed making those decisions under pressure. When we work with students on mindset, we build what we call if-then scripts. For example, if I hit a question I don't understand after 75 seconds, I skip it and flag it. If I'm halfway through the section and my pacing's off, I adjust my per question time for the rest. This way, test day doesn't become a choose-your-own-adventure with random decisions. It becomes executing a plan you've already practiced. And in a crowded year like this one, the calm, aggressive, and flexible test taker is the one who stays in control when everyone else starts guessing wildly and hoping for the best. And that control is worth more than any single trick you can learn. And every September, I see the same self-inflicted wounds, the habits that quietly drain points from otherwise capable test takers. And in a high-volume year like this, those points make the difference between being in the admit pile and finding it out on the waitlist. The first big mistake is studying for the wrong test. If you're still using old prep books full of logic games, you're training for a sport that's no longer played. That's time you could have been putting into logical reasoning and reading comp, which now make up the entire scored exam. I still see students spending hours on diagramming when they could be refining argument core skills or building reading comp mapping speed. The second big mistake is over-reviewing the questions you got right. And I know it feels good to revisit a question and pat yourself on the back, but you don't learn much from saying, yeah, I knew that, I'm awesome. The real gold is in asking, why did I almost pick that wrong answer? What about it felt tempting? That's how you build immunity to the traps that are designed to look correct under pressure. And the third big mistake is not keeping an error log. If you can't name your top 3 logical reasoning weaknesses and your top 2 reading comp passage types right now, you're not learning from your mistakes. You're just hoping they won't come up again. In reality, they will. And on test day, hope is a terrible strategy. The fourth big mistake is junk volume. Some students will crank through 5 practice tests a week, thinking volume equals improvement. But it doesn't. Without a deep review, those tests are just expensive Scantron practice. You're better off doing 2 or 3 tests a week, dissecting them until you understand exactly what drove every single wrong answer. And the last big mistake is making major changes in the final week. There's a temptation a lot of students have to throw in just one more new strategy right before game day, and this almost never works. The week before your LSAT is about stabilization, making your process automatic so you can execute under stress flawlessly. Inserting some brand new technique you just read about last minute is like changing your golf swing the night before a tournament. And so part of our job with our students is protecting them from themselves, making sure they're not sabotaging months of work with these mistakes. And in a year with this much competition, avoiding unforced errors is just as important as adding new skills. And because of my unique position in working with students, I get a front row seat to the real patterns behind the numbers. And in a year like this, one pattern stands out. It's not just that more people are taking the September LSAT this year. It's that more of them are peaking at exactly the same time. In a typical cycle, the readiness curve is spread out. Some people are peaking in September, others in November, and some not till January. But this year, the curve is steep and narrow. You've got a huge number of serious, well-prepared students who are timing their prep to hit maximum performance in September. That means the competition at the top of the scoring range is thicker than usual. And in practice, that means a single point in either direction could have an outsized impact. So if you're aiming for a 170 or above, you're not just competing against those who test well. You're competing against those who've been drilling timed sections for months, refining their error logs, and doing dress rehearsals under exact test day conditions. So the difference between getting the score you need and falling short could come down to one faster skip, one cleaner reading comp map, or one less careless error in logical reasoning. We're also seeing more students investing in refining the non-academic side, their sleep schedules, stress management routines, and exact test day logistics. In previous years, for a lot of students, that sort of thing was more of an afterthought, but this year, it's a standard part of serious prep, because now, this year, students understand the stakes. And so, with our students, we're doubling down on what we call micro decisions. It's not just study reading comp more or review necessary assumption questions. It's if you hit a question you don't understand, after 75 seconds, you skip it immediately and come back to it later. It's when you feel rushed on a reading comp inference question, go back to your map before rereading the entire passage. And those tiny pre-planned moves add up. In a normal year, they might just be nice to haves, but this year, for those taking the LSAT in September and beyond, they could swing your score enough to change your entire admissions outcome and your scholarship offers. And so, in the final week leading up to the test, of course, you're not going to have time to overhaul your prep. This week is all about tightening your execution, reducing uncertainty, and putting your brain in the best possible position to deliver the score you've been earning in practice. And day one starts with choosing your backup plan. If you're signed up for September, decide right now what your retake date would be if you don't hit your target. Maybe November, maybe January, and make that decision before you see your score so your emotions don't cloud your judgment later. Then you want to block out 3 2-hour study sessions for the final week and treat them like immovable appointments. They are non-negotiable. It's not like you're just going to fit them in somewhere. This is protected time where you shut out everything else and you run targeted drills or timed sections. Then you want to build out or update your mistake menu from your last 2 practice tests. List the exact logical reasoning families and reading comp passage types that are still costing you points, and put that list somewhere visible. Every drill this week should target one of those weak spots. Then for reading comp, you want to run 2 passages a day for 5 days. And you want to practice building a clean map with function tags, finding the exact line anchors for every single answer, and writing 1-sentence summaries of each passage. The goal here, of course, is not volume, it's flawless, repeatable process. Then you want to pick one logical reasoning family that's still shaky, maybe strengthen, assumption, or flaw, and do 15 to 20 high-quality reps with deep review. Then you switch to a different family type mid-week. This is focused maintenance, not random question grazing. You also want to get your application starter kit in motion. Draft your personal statement introduction and bullet your resume highlights. If you haven't asked your recommenders, you want to do that now. That way, you can hit submit fast after you get your score back. You also finally want to lock in your test day routine. Wake up at the same time you'll need to on test day, eat the same breakfast you'll eat then, and run at least one timed section or warm-up set in that exact window. The goal is for test day to feel like just another rep, not some weird one-off event that scrambles your rhythm. And for our students in this final stretch, we don't add any new strategies. We strip away anything that hasn't yet been tested by that student, and we focus instead on repeatable execution. This week is about making sure the version of you that shows up on test day is the one that's been hitting your goal score in practice, nothing more, nothing less. So stick to the plan, execute, and that's how you're going to win this cycle.